Hi, I'm Carmel Michael, and this is Hyacinth Podcast, The Interviews. This is a little bonus where I get to share some of the wonderful conversations I have that I can't fit into my regular episodes. If you've listened before, you know that Hyacinth Podcast is very carefully crafted, sort of put together the way I would write a song or a story. So a lot gets left on the cutting room floor, as they say. And I'd like to share more of that with you, because sometimes I have to leave out some really interesting stuff. So if you enjoy this interview, please be sure to check out my regular curated episodes, which are an experience all their own. You can subscribe on your favorite app or listen at hyacinthpodcast.com. Coming up is my extended interview with Dhiru Thadani, an award-winning architect and urban designer from Washington, D.C. We first heard from Dhiru in episode 5, Looking for Beauty. There he gave us insight into how beauty can be expressed in good design, not just aesthetically, but as a value, especially in our public and civic spaces. But there's a lot more to learn from him about the history of urbanism as a design theory and how it relates to both the ideals of beauty and to our everyday lives in the places we live. As an architect and planner, Dhiru has worked all over the world and is a charter member of the Congress for New Urbanism. He has been awarded the International Society of City and Regional Planners Lifetime Achievement Award, the 2011 Seaside Prize, and was a Knight Foundation Community Builder Fellow. Links to his 2 books, The Language of Towns and Cities, A Visual Dictionary, and Visions of Seaside, are on our website. For now, here's our conversation.
Well, my name is Dhiru Thadani, and I'm an architect and planner, originally from Bombay, India, now living in Washington, D.C. And over the years, I have gone from architecture to town planning and several other related fields, and authored a few books and taught at a few universities.
I wanted to talk to you about beauty because I think that the work that you do stands at a really interesting intersection of thinking about beauty as a sort of aesthetic thing, but also as an experiential thing. And I thought maybe we could start at the beginning. You mentioned you were born in Bombay. I saw you speak, I saw in a lecture you gave that you said this interesting thing about how what you see out your window as a child can influence your path in life. And so I wanted to kind of ask you, what did you see out your window, and what were some of your early memories of encounters with beauty, or what did you think was beautiful or see as beautiful as a child where you grew up?
Well, I grew up in Bombay, and from the age of 5 to 15, I lived in an apartment across from Bombay University. And looking out my window, so Bombay University was a sort of Gothic stone building, very much built by the British in India, very much like many universities around the world. It was a classical structure, excepting it had an arcade on the outside, which was the circulation. And so the classrooms were on the interior, but facing the street was an arcade. And there was a pediment entry to one of the entries to the university. It was kind of a classical pediment, columns. And on top, in the pediment said the word science. So that's what my bedroom faced. And I could see that when I was laying in bed. And it was a very imposing structure. It was civic. As a young child, it made an impression on me that this is an important building. And then the word science was there, emblazed in the pediment. And one of the memories I had was when during class breaks, the corridor would get very noisy with students. So there was this kind of rhythm to the day where during class it was very quiet, and then for 15 minutes it was this kind of cacophony of voices. and then it went quiet again. And so that kind of intrigued me. And I think there was no doubt in my mind after that experience that I would go to college and also study science. And that's what I did, as my high school major. So I think there was, a very strong influence by seeing this very strong civic building uh, every day, for 10 years. That motivated at least my first career path.
It's interesting. American writer Marilyn Robinson says that the mystery, the mystery that compels science, and the mystery that elevates religion, is similar, and she connects the whole idea of mystery in general to beauty. So I find it sort of interesting that you come from a root of being interested in science, and then maybe you could talk a bit more about how you moved then into maybe what is your second career. How did you first get into design and architecture?
In that same apartment building, there was the front of house, which was the apartments, and then there was the back of house, which was the domestic help lived. And so we all lived in the same building. Though we lived in, the apartments were somewhat luxurious, and then the back of house was more cramped, but with many people living there, families, multiple families living, who were connected to the domestic help. And from my apartment, which was on the first floor or second floor by American standards, um, I looked down. I could look down and see the compound, and I saw a young child, a young boy, maybe 10 years older than me. It's a young boy, a teenager, and he was drawing on a pencil pad, and he turned out to be the son of one of the domestic help. Anyway, I went down, engaged with him, and looked at his drawing, was impressed, and this is the servant, the son of a domestic help, gave me my first piece of paper and pencil, in the sense that, and said, "Hey, you can do this too. You can make a drawing." And so there was this kind of connection where I saw somebody do something, and then was inspired to say, "Well, I want to be able to do that." And so it really started my drawing, my fondness for drawing, or my attempts at drawing. And I think that's what's so important about great cities. Great cities can inspire young people into the profession that they might grow up to be in. Because when you see those things, or you see someone else doing it, something connects with you inside, and you say, "Okay, I'd like to be doing that too." And if it's like, in this case, it was a beautiful drawing or a depiction of a scene, a street scene, uh, and there was something in that drawing that spoke to me and said, "Well, you're capturing the essence of this place, and I want to be able to do that." So, so drawing was always, part of my life from a very early age, and I took a career in science, and through, a lot of advice and counseling, I realized that architecture was a really good combination of science and art. You need the scientific and the art for the artistic. So that's how I landed up studying architecture.
So is this what Leon Creer talks about when he speaks of the human scale, the fact that you could look down and see what this person down below you was doing, that you weren't so far up in a tower in the sky?
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly one of the bases for good urbanism. Creer talks about uh, the fact that we always like to vacation in places that are 2 or 3 stories. You don't go on vacation and stay in a place in a high-rise building. Well, if you're in New York, maybe, but other than that, most of the choices people make are places that are of low scale, and it's really about the connection between the ground plane, the street level, and where you're residing. You become part of the street, or you become an actor in the life of the street. So that's so Creers talks a lot about this issue of scale, human scale, and that connectedness between the apartment and the street.
So this is the sort of theory under which you do most of your work, correct? Urbanism or
Yes,
new urbanism, are those sort of
yes,
interchangeable
yes.
terms?
Well, New urbanism is an advocacy movement, or is a movement, but it's also an advocacy group. And it really starts off back in the 80s and 90s as a kind of antidote to single-use developments. So after World War II, in this highly efficient mode to provide housing, uh, we enter into building housing on cheap land, and hence the suburbs outside the cities. And everything else is forgotten. It's just the goal is to build houses. So the intentions were very good. You wanted to house the soldiers coming back. You wanted to house people, and you wanted to, keep the production going in the country. The kind of what was the war machine now has to do something else. So in that process, the concentration was housing, and they forgot about everything, all the other ingredients that make place. And so in 1960, we get the advent of the shopping mall because people living out in the suburbs have to shop. And so that piece of the city kind of decants from the inner city out to the suburbs. And then the next thing that happens by 1970 is that the requirements for the schools say that schools need to have playgrounds. All schools need to have playgrounds. So it's a demise of the neighborhood school, and the schools move out to the suburbs where the people are. So you now get these kind of mega schools being built in the suburbs where children are either parents have to drive their kids to school, or kids drive themselves if they're old enough, or the bus picks them up. And then finally, in 1980, you have the invention of the office park. And so the fourth ingredient from that makes a city offices, the workplace, also moves out to the suburbs. So when we start looking at these four things out there, they're in no place. None of them make a place where you can congregate, where you can have community. They're a whole series of pods. And new urbanism really comes out of a criticism of that way of building to say, why can't we join or reconnect all these pieces? Housing, work, play, schooling, retail, into a town form like it used to be. And so that was really the kind of birth of new urbanism. And started, people were talking about this in the 80s, but it actually, the group formed, the Congress for the New Urbanism formed in 93. Um, and so that was sort of the goal. And the primary goal was to kind of bring back placemaking. And placemaking is the kind of important ingredient because it's a place in the environment which belongs to everybody. So everyone's an equal when they're in this public space. And in the past, it was always associated with civic spaces, in front of the Capitol, or in front of a library, or a school building. You had an open space, and everyone could enjoy, or a park in a neighborhood. And it was something everyone paid for, and it belonged to everyone. And this idea of placemaking has been lost in the built environment, in this efficiency to provide housing. And that's really what we're trying to bring back. And along with that is this idea that you have to make a place that's enjoyable, it's beautiful, where people want to be. You don't want to create a barren place where nobody wants to be. So that's where beauty comes in. And beauty, you know, uh, beauty is a value. It's as important as truth and goodness, and it's provides meaning, to life, because beauty is what takes your breath away, and it uplifts the human spirit. So it's absolutely essential to always think about embodying beauty. And there was a time when artists, all kinds of artists, writers, poets, singers, uh, they worked to embody beauty. That was the goal. to have something beautiful in their work that moved the human spirit. So, and somehow in the last 50 years, we have lost that. It's gone to originality and abstraction and concepts. So we've taken away, what we value more now in art is originality, highly promoted by the artists themselves.
It's really interesting the way you describe beauty as being something that takes your breath away and as something that uplifts you. That's very much how a lot of the kind of big thinkers of old thought of beauty as well, and how even philosophers and scholars talk about it now. I'm wondering, how then do you, when you're sitting down in front of a set of plans, let's get really basic and practical. How do you say, as an urbanist, say, listen, beauty's important. So how do you get it in there? Like, how does it happen?
It's a difficult notion because, a lot of people now, I've heard this, that, we can't afford beauty from a lot of developers, and, that's not the issues at hand. You try in the work, you first look at things that have worked. Architecture and planning is the recreation of positive experiences. So all the positive experiences that you've had in your life uh, is sort of the kind of catalog. And it's also one of the reasons why I make so many drawings. It's because I'm always building this catalog of places that I've visited, and I want to remember them, and I want to remember the qualities, what I liked about them. At the same time, I also want to document what didn't work, because the last thing you want to do is repeat conditions, that had a negative experience. So an underpass under a highway, have you ever seen one that's really beautiful? So why would you, recreate that? Okay. So it's this emulation of positive experiences, and for that you need a kind of catalog. And by studying what has worked, you study the order, the proportion, what gives you enclosure, what makes the space. So you don't really have to talk about it per se with a client, but you design that in, and it's there for people to recognize. And the human body hasn't changed, you know, much in the last 2,000 years. So we all get tired if we walk more than a certain distance or we climb a certain amount of stairs. So those spaces, these principles of urbanism or space making are pretty much constant, no matter where you are in the world. Okay, in India they might walk a little bit longer, could tolerate the heat a little bit more, but generally after a certain point, you get fatigued. So you want to create places that understand the kind of human physiology, of the kind of what is it about humans that make them, places to sit, uh, shade. Uh, don't have steps where it rains because there's slipping hazards. Have a canopy if you have stairs, protected. And these are the kind of experiences you gather when you go around and look, and you're always trying to absorb this and catalog them, so that when you actually do work, it becomes second nature in your work to, you know, instill these ideas in there. Uh, I see nothing wrong with looking at something and emulating the scale or the proportions of that space. One would say it's not original, but it becomes original in the transformation process, because we can't build the same way we built 500 years ago. So in the process of trying to make it, it becomes original. But we're not fooling with the kind of fundamental enclosure, the space, the shade, etc. Those things, you might use different trees, you might use different materials, but you walk into a place like Piazza Navona in Rome, and it's this great oval room, and and you feel like, okay, I'm part of this community, and there's, churches, houses, schools, all those things facing into that space. Um, and and as a visitor, you immediately become part of it. Kind of get sucked into the city, and you say, "I'm one of these people." So, and I think that's the power that good design can have. It's. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint this, but it really is about being moved, somehow being moved spiritually, or in some way. When you see it, it happens.
Absolutely. And I think, from my background as a writer and musician, the idea of originality always has been problematic because if you come from the sort of folk tradition, the whole folk process is just taking and reworking other people's work. It's the same story over and over again, right?
Right.
So I've always actually really loved the idea. Like Elaine Scarry talks about beauty as inspiring creation and recreation, and also as reciprocity and as duplication, which is very similar to what you're saying. Good design, you're trying to kind of replicate
Yes.
positive experiences. So the human physiology hasn't changed much, and really our basic values and cares haven't changed that much either. So it's interesting, you can walk into a space that is hundreds or thousands of years old and still feel that, what the original designers hoped for.
Right. And yeah, and I think that's what makes it so interesting. You try to capture those moments that someone, and it's partially it's about community. It's also sometimes just walking in a place and reading a quotation on a wall, or and that speaks to you, and you're inspired by that moment.
Yeah.
And uh, I'm not always sure, how that happens, but I'm always looking for when it, I'm sort of aware that this can happen. So I'm open to the idea that I'm going to experience something wonderful.
That's such an amazing way to walk around the world. I mean, I think that, you can't experience beauty necessarily unless you're looking for it.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
all the different signs, and what I love is the kind of decoding. When you go to different places, like I've spent a lot of time in China working there, and their notions of landscape, or a rock. I mean, they've got three different types of rocks that they like, or in their kind of lexicon for landscape. Uh, so it's a different kind of, but it's sort of archetypal for them. It's been built into their from youth, and so they find beauty, in nature, and they're looking for certain moments in nature that kind of speak to them. So it's different, but it's still based on this, on these principles of uplifting the human spirit.
So you've traveled and worked a lot around the world. Do you find that there is that kind of common thread between what people see as beautiful, or is it very different culturally? Is it very contextual?
I think there's some pieces that are universally beautiful, right? Like the Taj Mahal. I don't know anybody who could stand in front of the Taj Mahal and say, "Oh, it's something that you see this kind of beautiful white, perfectly proportioned object, and you say, this is beautiful, right? And that speaks to everybody. Or the Venus de Milo and the Louvre. I think you could take that anywhere, bring anyone in front of it, and they would find it beautiful. So there's certain pieces like that that are universal, and there are also things that are particular to regions. So the kind of piece of this craggy piece of vertical stone that you might come across in a Chinese landscape, might be, something you notice and say, okay, that's that. But to a Chinese person of Chinese origin, they would find that much more symbolic. Okay, and it's certain things that similarly in India, there's certain elements that are associated with certain folklores and stories. And so that's where, those are archetypals. Carl Jung says, every culture has these archetypal forms. So that's particular to region, but there's other things that are completely universal. And the size of space, actually, what's interesting is that the scale of space is also relatively uniform. In terms of feeling comfortable in an outdoor room. So when we talk about in urbanism creating these outdoor rooms, where it's based on the human scale, but if you think of a space like St. Mark's or Dupont Circle, or you think of an outdoor space or kind of a memory, a memorable space. It has a certain sense of enclosure. The walls of the building are like walls of a room, but a larger scale. And then the base of those buildings, if the base is articulated, that's almost like a baseboard molding in a room. And then you've got the surface of the wall in the room, and you've got with windows, and you've got this kind of multitude of wallpaper on the buildings with windows. And then you've got a cornice. You've got some element there that meets the sky. Okay, and then you've got the sky canopy. So like a room, you've got a cornice and you've got the ceiling, etc. So, but it's a blown up. It's a larger room, so the walls have to be higher, etc. But it's got a proportion that you feel enclosed, you feel comfortable in, just like a child feels comfortable under the dining room table with the tablecloth draped over. That's where they want to go and play. Similarly, as we grow up and we're in the community, we can be in a large public space and feel very much at home, in that. So it's this idea of placemaking is, somewhat related to making this room that's human scale.
Yeah, that's really, I've never thought about it that way, but that's a really interesting thing to visualize. So just to sort of wrap up then, where do you see beauty now? Like now in your life, what is beautiful to you?
Well, here's what I would say about beauty, and that is, I have been very lucky to travel, and many of us, okay, I would say, globally, there's very few of us, percentage-wise, that have the luxury to be able to travel wherever and to multitude of places. Okay, but what we have to remember is that in every city, in every place, there are many people who are not as fortunate as us. Okay, they don't have the opportunity to travel and see, sunset in Santorini, or where the building's starting to light up at sunset. These kind of magical moments that happen. So, as a designer, it's incumbent on us, and as anybody who's involved with the built environment, whether it's the policymaker, the designer, the contractor, planning officials, it's incumbent upon us to make beautiful places in the city for people who are less fortunate and cannot afford to travel and experience these great moments. And I think that's the key that we have to remember, is that by even a simple, beautifully designed fountain in a park, that could be the moment for somebody less fortunate. He or she could go to that park and say, yeah, this is really great. I love sitting here, in the middle of the day. And that's the obligation that we have to everybody, because, not all of us are lucky to, travel around and experience all these great things and great moments. And that's what it is about the civic realm, what we call the civic realm. It's the public room. It's where it belongs to everybody. Everyone is welcome, and everyone's equal in sharing in these beautiful things. We shouldn't privatize beauty or beautiful objects. It should be out there. One of the things I love about the Louvre in Paris is when you walk on the outside of the Louvre, even if you can't afford to go in, there's statues in the window, and as a pedestrian, you're looking at the beauty that's held inside the building. And I think that's just a wonderful decision to share that art with someone who might not be able to afford to go in, or someone who might not have the time is walking by. You look in and say, hey, look at that beautiful sculpture, or, And that could, I mean, that could make your day, just seeing something like that and just being inspired. And I think we need to embed that in cities and places everywhere. These hidden surprises. I was in Amsterdam recently, and looking at a work of an architect who passed away at the age of 36. And very unfortunate that we didn't really see his career blossom. But he did some public housing in Amsterdam, and in that housing, the people who were going to live in that public housing, because Amsterdam had grown from 20,000 to 200,000 people at the turn of the century, he knew these people were coming from the countryside to the city where there was more opportunity. And in the iconography in the building, he embedded all these beautiful little moments of, windmills and stalks of hay, things that they were familiar with that they had left behind. And he put that in, hidden in the building. Okay, it's there. If you find it, it's not always obvious. And then as you walk through the hallways, you might come across, a bird embedded in the brickwork, sculpted out of the brickwork. So all through it is these really moments of beautiful little objects, but not in your face. It's just sort of like the discovery so you could live in that apartment for a long time and not know that something around the corner within the next hallway, is this little moment. And I thought that was just a really wonderful way to incite, especially children, to explore the building and get to know their neighbors. Again, make community.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your insights. I really like the angle you take just based on your experience. It's really great. So thank you for all of this. This is wonderful. This has been Hyacinth Podcast, The Interviews with Dhiru Thadani. You can also hear Dhiru in episode 5, Looking for Beauty. And to listen to all of my regular curated episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit hyacinthpodcast.com. And as always, connect with me using @HyacinthPodcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where you can leave comments about the episodes and share your own stories. I love to hear from you. I'm Carmel Michael. Thank you for listening.